Hi, Dr. Nancy. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Great. And so I'm really excited for our discussion for today because we're going to start a series about attachment. So we're going to explore today what are attachments, how do attachments develop, and theory of attachments. But Dr. Nancy, you're the expert here, so can you please get started and enlighten us about this topic?
Yes, absolutely. So this is a really big topic, and I'm really glad that we're splitting this into separate podcasts here. But I love to explain what that is. And attachments really refer to the emotional bonds that develop between people. And these bonds start forming in early childhood with our primary caregivers and continue to influence our relationships throughout our lives, actually. So essentially, attachments are the connections that give us a sense of security and comfort. And between a child and uh, an attacher, the need for safety and protection and comfort is vital. And so attachments in the context of human relationships really refer to emotional bonds and those connections between individuals. And they can form with family, friends, romantic partners, and even colleagues. And in psychology, attachment theory describes how these bonds are developed during early childhood and how they impact individuals' behaviors and emotions throughout life. And that theory really suggests that secure attachments with caregivers during infancy leads to positive social development and healthy relationships in adulthood. And attachments can be seen as the foundation of intimacy and trust in relationships. So when two individuals form strong emotional bonds, they feel comfortable being vulnerable and sharing their thoughts and feelings and experiences with one another. However, attachments can also be seen to have negative effects on relationships as well. In some cases, attachments can become unhealthy and even toxic, as many of your listeners have probably experienced at times. So, for example, when individuals develop an insecure attachment style due to past trauma or neglect, they may struggle with trust and intimacy in their relationships. And this can lead to issues of codependency, fear of abandonment, difficulty setting boundaries. So attachments can be affected by external factors as well as distance, time apart, changes in life circumstances, and I'll be talking about that in a little bit. But these changes can really strengthen or be a negative impact to effective communication efforts to weaken them if they're not properly addressed throughout life. And I can go on and tell you the types of attachment styles if you'd like.
Thank you. Yeah, before that, can you
Yes.
just shortly kind of clarify so why understanding attachments is actually crucial for like healthy relationships?
It's so crucial for healthy relationships because um, those attachments play a significant role in our social and emotional development. So they help us to develop trust, empathy, establish those really good boundaries in relationships, and they serve as support and comfort during challenging times. And attachments are an important aspect here because they influence the health and the success of partnerships. So when we talk about attachments in the context of relationships, we really refer to these as emotional bonds and that form between two people, and the interactions and experiences really shape us to be able to relate to others. So understanding attachments is crucial for healthy relationships because it develops an understanding of our own behaviors and patterns with relationships. And we all have different attachment styles, which are influenced by our upbringing and past experiences. And these styles can either enhance or really hinder our ability to connect with others in a very healthy way. So, for example, if someone who has a secure attachment style, they may find it easier to trust their partner, to communicate effectively, maintain a healthy level of independence within the relationship. But on the other hand, someone with an insecure attachment style may struggle with feelings of anxiety, jealousy, fear of abandonment, or fear of abandonment in their relationships. So by understanding those attachment styles, that we hold and our parents hold, we can better navigate those challenges by understanding where we're coming from and where our partner is coming from. And it helps us to recognize potential patterns in our partners, ourselves, our children, and other environmental relationships that we have. So another example is for anxious attachment style, the need to constantly seek validation from our partner could potentially lead to some constraints and codependency in the relationship instead of being independent in a relationship. So we can work towards creating those healthier dynamics and communication by understanding our attachment styles. And I do believe that this is foundational here for good, healthy relationships. So if we understand where we come from, how we've related as a child to our parents, how we are connected, how we are able to move beyond the connection with our parents, be able to launch in the world, is crucial for building those relationships. Yes.
Thank you. And so now that was my only question, and thank you for that answer. It was very clear. So now I'm ready to move forward if you are.
I am. So I'd like to share a little bit about what attachment styles or specific attachment styles. I think that's really important. On the internet, you can probably find a lot of assessments to figure out, what is my attachment style? Our goal in life is to become what I call a safe attacher. But there are four different or distinct attachment styles that are important to talk about. And the first one is something called disorganized attachment. And disorganized attachment really emerges when children are raised in unpredictable, neglectful, hostile, or abusive environments. And it's thought to reflect environments which maybe a parent is frightened or busy, or they can't attend to a child. But what happens is that the child naturally seeks their caregiver, and usually the mother, for safety. And so when the child is frightened, they go to the caregiver for safety. But if mom is busy, if the environment is stressful, they're working, they can't really connect to the child when they're frightened, or they feel like, oh, I shouldn't attend to my child that way. What happens is that it's really confusing for kids to learn, are you safe or are you not? Are you there for me or you're not? Because sometimes you are, and sometimes you're not. And I'm trying to figure out, as a 2-year-old, a 3-year-old, an infant, what safety looks like between the two of us. The next one is insecure ambivalent. And we learn really, really young that maybe we shouldn't leave our caregiver. Again, I'll just talk about mothers. Mothers are very important in the attachment styles. And children tend to be a little clingy here, but clinginess is not necessarily a bad thing. It's a developmental process. And so being able to understand your child, I know that you're not feeling safe right now, but you're going to be okay. And helping them through that process really provides them with a safety net that they know that you're there for them when they need you. But when we have insecure ambivalent, we're just not sure where we should separate and not separate. And so it becomes in adulthood where we maybe have difficulty making decisions, or we want to do something, we're not ready to do something, we want to attach to this person, but parts of us are saying, I don't know. And so we're sort of ambivalent about a lot of things. And there's two more. The third one is insecure attachment, or avoidant, insecure avoidant. And that's where we show little interest in the caregiver. We really prefer to maybe focus playing independently. We're not really upset when our caregiver leaves the room. And they can seem, as a child, really indifferent of whether or not you're there, or concerned about that. And the last one, which we all strive for here, is to become securely attached. And this is the gold medal of attachment, which is where infants securely attach to those caregivers and use the caregivers as a base from which to explore their environment. So when the caregiver isn't present, a securely attached child may show distress. But when the reunion happens, when mom comes back, let's say, and we'll talk about that in a little bit too, but the securely attached infant recognizes and seeks that contact, and the caregiver is genuinely there for them and comforts that child. And it really helps that good developmental and cognitive outcomes later in life.
Thank you. So you just explained four different attachment styles and how they like kind of develop or form in like when we are very young. So can you just explain like how do there happen some changes throughout the adulthood? Like kind of what happens to these attachment styles later on like in life? Like how do they develop then, when we grow up more?
Right. Yes. So while attachment styles are really formed in childhood, they develop through a process that starts in infancy and then continues throughout our lifetime. And so, as an infant, we form those initial attachment styles, and we tend to typically hold on to many of those things as we grow. But if we become more aware of ourselves and more understand, we have a better idea of how we attach to people, where our insecurities come from, if we're ambivalent or anxious, avoidant, we can start to formulate new ways of connecting. But we tend to, unless there's intervention and we have experiences with solid, secure attachment, we tend to not know what that looks like later on in life. And but hopefully, as adolescence comes along, and then into adulthood, we grow more independent to form better attachments with significant others. Through our siblings, extended family members, and close friends, we can feel what it's like to have somebody that's there for us, that's safe for us. And you can have reciprocity in relationships, and you can get back what you're trying to give to somebody else. And there's the ability to form some vulnerability when there's safer attachments. In adolescence, parts of what adolescents are supposed to do is to be able to become more independent. And attachment styles become a little more complex at this point. We're seeking those relationships with our peers and with our caregivers, but we're trying to distance ourselves a bit from that. And while those earlier attachment styles are still there, helping our adolescents through understanding and guiding them, nurturing them, and helping them understand them better as they grow, they can make better decisions in life and attach to better, safer, I shouldn't say better, but safer people who would, like, let's say, have their back, or would be there in an emergency or crisis, wouldn't cause crisis, but they're safe and they feel much better. We tend at times when we have unsafe attachment styles to bond with people who are more toxic, and we normalize that toxicity because it's what we know. But life events such as marriage and parenthood and career and living situations can impact those experiences with our attachment styles. And so if we're pushing and working towards secure attachments, we have to understand what that actually means with someone else and within ourselves. So our experiences continue to shape those relationships and interactions with others all the way through the time that we are no longer on this earth. And we tend to, at my age, look back and look at those attachment styles and go, wow, what was that like? And could I have done it a bit different? Could I have felt safer? Could I have felt more connected with people? Did I have opportunities for that? And that's what I see with my clients who are middle-aged, trying to work through some difficult relationships in their lives.
Thank you. A few things. So you said kind of like if you have like not secure attachment, so any of those other three ones that are not secure attachment, it might be very, and because if they are formed through your childhood, you might not have a template or a role model or model like what is a secure attachment. And then you also said that if you have insecure attachment, or like if you don't have secure attachment, you might be drawn to like more toxic people and people
Yes.
who do not have secure attachments themselves. But then if the
Mhm.
only way kind of to learn about it, or one of the like most effective ways to learn about what secure attachment is to actually be with someone who other person who has secure attachment, so you kind of get to see what it's like, what it's supposed to feel like. But then we don't gravitate towards that. So it isn't like, I'm just thinking like this seems like very then like almost like you just have to be very lucky to end up with a like a other person or where you who has a secure attachment if you kind of your whole being is more gravitated towards not securely
Right.
attached people. So any thoughts about this point of view?
Yes. So thank you for mentioning luck. I don't really think it's luck. I think it's what we know. And we know what we know from our own histories. And you're right, we don't have the template of what a safe attachment looks like if that's not what we've been given. And it's through working on yourself, understanding yourself, knowing and being able to label it, maybe identify different relationships to understand um, the trouble that insecure or ambivalent or avoidant relationships look like. Again, we tend to normalize, though, this is how it is. Well, really, it isn't. It looks like this. And what I find is that, folks tell me, I don't know what that is. And I certainly understand where they're coming from. And sometimes we have to reflect back to maybe it was a teacher, maybe it was a friend. Did you feel as if you could go to them and they were there for you and they wouldn't turn their back on you? Again, this is a safety connection here, that my psyche is safe with you, my physical safety is with you, my emotional needs are recognized by you, and I'm not minimized, I'm not humiliated or shamed. Um, One of the things that most people say to me is, I don't know what to do with somebody who's nice to me. I don't know how to take that. I don't know how to take somebody treating me well. And that tells me we've got some attachment issues, that they're not used to being in the presence of someone who is much safer for them. And so people tend not to, people are very resistant to that kind of experience with someone.
Thank you. Then also a question: is there like any specific parenting styles or like environmental factors that contribute to specific attachment styles, or is it like for example the disorganized, is there something specific in parenting or environment that specifically leads to individual forming disorganized, and then does it differ a little bit from someone who maybe develops the like insecure ambivalent, or can you talk about this?
Oh yes, it definitely is something that is very, very influential here. And there's several key factors of influence in individuals' attachment styles. And these can include things like parenting styles, environmental influences, genetic predispositions, even epigenetics is a really important topic to be looking at when we're considering attachment styles, because we have to look specifically when I work with someone, I look at past generational traumas, because through epigenetics, it really does shape and form how someone's parented, what their environment looks like. How does somebody get out of situations? Because that trauma really trickles down. So, um, specifically in parenting styles, um, someone who is, let's say, warm, a parent who's warm and responsive, can foster that secure attachment style while inconsistent or maybe emotionally distant parents can result in having a child forming that insecure attachment. So sometimes children who experience neglect, abuse from their caregivers may develop those insecure attachment styles for not having their emotional needs met consistently. I think too, many times the specific neglect here that I see is people will share with me, well, you had food, you had clothing, and you had a roof over your head, but that's not enough. Those are your basic needs. We're looking at the emotional needs, the social needs, the connectedness needs. Those needs are so important. The identity needs. The self-appreciation, the belonging, those kind of needs need to really be um, nourished in the home. And many times there's stressors in the family, financial issues, maybe somebody's moved, a divorce, different kinds of things that really upset those attachment styles. So the environment plays such a big factor here. Such things as those cultural norms and socioeconomic statuses really contribute to the development of attachment styles. So a child can grow up in poverty and face significant stress and adversity that might impact those attachment styles. So let's say mom has 3 jobs that she's trying to take care of the kids, and financially is on her own. She's really struggling to meet those other types of needs because she's just working on those basic needs of food, clothing, and shelter. Genetic predispositions are also influential here, and studies have found that certain genes associated with the production of the oxytocin and serotonin that help with our mood regulation really affect those abilities to form secure attachment. So, like temperament, for example, if someone has, a melancholic temperament, they're going to be less likely to attach to someone, maybe, even their caregiver. It's just not a part of their intrapsychic personality, let's say. So those are big factors there. Trauma and loss can really affect ourselves as well. So losing a loved one at an early age, feeling really insecure and fearful, mistrustful, and being abandoned really affect those attachment styles as well. But the good news is that attachment styles really are not set in stone. They can change over time with interventions and therapy, self-reflection, building healthy relationships can overcome those experiences and form healthier attachment patterns with others. And so I really feel that as we learn, what we're trying to do is to shape the next generation. So when we have our own children, that those epigenetics and trauma and multi-generational traumas, we shift just a bit here. We don't have control over everything, but if we can shift it somewhat, we hope that the next generation does the same thing and the next generation. So we're sort of doing an upswing on having better attachment styles for our future families.
Thank you. That was very comprehensive and interesting. So also I have another question. So like if there's two people, like if there's an like let's say abusive parent, is it like so it might be that I develop disorganized attachment, or it might be that I develop avoidant. Which one I develop, is that then like it may be my own temperament, my own like genetic factors that might like affect like, okay, do I become avoidant or do I become disorganized? Or is it the level of abuse that is, if it's very abusive, then it's more likely that's going to be disorganized? Or okay, or is that even a like, is disorganized kind of the, how do I say, like that happens when there is a lot of abuse? Or yeah, like can you answer this one?
Yeah, so what you're asking is really complex, very, very complex. And so the answer would be yes, all of those things. But if we try to look at this in the form of simplicity here, we're all born with genetics, which we can't change at this point. Temperament, which is not something that we can change. We're born with this. What we do is we learn how to cope with it and live with it. And then what we call a blank slate of life. And that's really our environmental influences, our connections, parents, school, beyond the socio cultural, surroundings, the politics, I mean, around us that really shape who we are. So experiences from, 0 to however old we are, those shape our attachment styles. Many times, um, we try to compartmentalize some of these things and we can't. And I think that we just have to look at each person individually and see the factors that have been influential in those attachment styles. I do see with disorganized attachment, there are certain people who have been through a lot of trauma who have this type of attachment style. And um, disorganized attachment is really difficult to grow up with, and relationships tend to be very, very difficult for folks with disorganized attachment, because there's such a desire to connect and feel accepted and loved, and this disorganization is confusing. And I think, in looking at the topic of your whole entire podcast series, many times people who are in narcissistic abusive relationships tend to have disorganized attachment because it's the off and on and the manipulativeness, but it feels right and then it feels wrong and then I get hurt but then I want to go back, and it's very complicated, but this is kind of what I see in many of the people that I work with, very connected to trauma.
Thank you. Are you saying that are like avoidant or like anxious, are they like easier attachment styles to deal with and live with, or?
Yeah, great question. No, they're not easier. Avoidant attachers, if we'll use the word attachers, um, tend to find you'll find them avoiding lots of things. So strong emotions, like coming out and really expressing themselves, is very difficult. They're more emotionally inhibited. They tend not to want to talk about things. Many people with disorganized or anxious attachment styles will tend to I do this little hand movement when I work with folks, that here's the avoidant person and here's the anxious person, and they like each other a lot. And so they tend to find each other. And so the avoidant goes like this, and the attacher goes, wait, let me catch up to you. And this feels right. The chase feels right to the anxious person, but the avoidant person is going, oh no. And it tends to cause a lot of problems because this person feels abandoned and this person feels very overloaded and they want to go away. And so it produces a lot of anxiety and stress, and relationships become quite difficult. But I see these two attachment styles as being very common with folks who've had a lot of trauma as well. So the answer is no, one is not easier than the other.
Thank you. Have you ever heard about the term like self-focused attachment?
Yes, I have. Mm-hmm.
Any
Yeah.
any can you explain what it is and your thoughts about it in general?
Yeah. So self-focused attachment. Well, tell me, like, when you think of the term self-focused attachment, what are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, so I actually heard this from when I did another podcast like series with another professional, and she brought it up to me, and she uses that to describe kind of narcissistic people or people who have NPD or individuals who are not interested in seeking genuine, authentic connections, but are interested in connections from the point of view like how it can meet my needs, how it can benefit me, how can I exploit, and like very, very like obviously harmful approach to connection that, and it's almost like it's yeah, it's not like these people do not have the need or desire to actually connect with another human beings in a healthy way. So that's my what comes to my mind. uh
Right.
so yeah.
Yes. Yeah, I'm really glad that you brought that up. And so narcissism, the first 5 years of life are very important for personality development. If you study Freud and Erikson and some of the other early developmental theorists, and the ego gets developed during this period of time, and attachment really connects to the ego formation. So self-focus is that many times the caregiver um, is not there for the child. So mom or dad could turn their back on the child. The child has to make up for themselves at an early age to determine, how am I going to get my needs met? And so maybe mom is indulgent, maybe, or they're distant and they don't really care. I've seen both things happen, but what happens is that you turn into the self and you depend on yourself at a really young age to get your own needs met. And that's not where we're supposed to do that. We are supposed to get our needs met by our caregivers. But for some reason, that's not happening. And so turning to the self, while you might think that that's, and not relating it to narcissism here, but I'm going to take care of myself above and beyond anybody else. And I'm only going to look out for myself. There's a lot of mistrust that happens when you are self-focused like that. And if you go back and look at some of the dynamics of what's happened in that person's history, you'll find that there's a lot of damage that has happened. And so I can't trust that I'm going to get my needs met, or I got my needs met too much. And so I'm going to only focus on the self. And I also think with neurobiology, there is that rush of being self-focused and getting my needs met versus anybody else's. So I'm only going to attach to myself because at some point, I'm really not going to need you because you're going to be unimportant to me or blah to me. And I need to move on. And I'm just going to look out for myself. And so many times people are pawns just to get those needs met. What works for me, and it doesn't really matter about you, which is really sad and hard.
Yeah, thank you. You said also if they got their needs met too much. Do you like what do you mean by that? Are you saying that someone can develop a self-focused attachment if their parents like got their needs too much met, or what did you mean by that?
Yeah, so overindulgence. Um, you know, um, I there's many times like you can hear parents not hold children accountable or give what we call realistic limits, um, where there's reciprocity, where we don't treat people this way, guiding with morals and values and helping the child learn to regulate a bit of the ego here. When parents brag and listen, it's not a bad thing to brag about your kids, but all the time and sort of overinflate the child's, let's say, excelling or their importance in life. You often see this in too with siblings. One child is the kid that's failed, and the other child is that golden child. And so, there's a lot of parents who have high expectations of this golden child to sort of help them feel like, oh, look what I've done, a great job, look how great he is. And then the overindulgence really happens, and that becomes a problem. It's unrealistic.
Thank you so much. Could you also like talk more about kind of the theory of attachments? So explain uh, some of the theory of attachments.
Yeah, so psychology is the newest science. I mean, if you look back in history, but back in the late 30s, 40s, John Bowlby was one of the biggest pioneers in attachment theory, and he focused on early relationships and their impact on child's emotional and social development. And he believed that infants have an innate drive to form attachments with their primary caregivers and usually their mothers. And that's why I talk about mothers. These attachments serve as a secure base from which the child can explore and really learn about the world. And so his theory really emphasized the importance of consistent and responsive caregivers in a child's life. And he really argued that the disruption or lack of availability from a primary attachment figure could have some negative consequences on a child's development, which leads to potentially anxiety, depression, and potential delinquency. And his belief in this critical period of attachment, which really suggests the first 2 years of life being, very, very important here and very significant in that development. One of the most significant methods developed by John Bowlby and Mary Ainsworth, and I'll talk about in just a minute, they were kind of colleagues here, was to assess the attachment relationships through something called the strain situation. Actually, Mary Ainsworth designed this, but you can actually look for it on YouTube and see. It's quite interesting to watch. I actually used that to teach some of my students. But when an infant is observed in a controlled environment while interacting with their caregiver and a stranger, there's something interesting that happens. And so in the video, you'll notice that the parent actually does a separation moment where she or he leaves the room, and there's a reunion process, and how the child reacts to the caregiver's absence and then their return really shows the connectedness of a child and the attachment style, whether it's secure, avoidant, resistant, or anxious, disorganized. And so this type of framework has really provided valuable insight into the quality of attaching types of relationships. And we still use this theory today, and it really is a foundational piece of what I do as well.
Thank you. Was there also, can you talk about person called Donald Winnicott and his contributions to understanding attachments?
Yes, Donald Winnicott is a pioneer as well. He is a British a pediatrician and psychoanalyst, and he made really significant contributions to the field of child development. And if you ever get a chance to read any of his work, it's fascinating. But he's best known for his theory on object relations, which focuses on how an infant's relationship with their primary caregiver shapes their sense of self and relationships through life. And one area where Winnicott's theories have been particularly influential is understanding those attachments. And he refers to attachments as that emotional bond that develops, again, through that primary caregiver and often the mother. It's really focused on the mother. If you think about when the child is conceptualized, they are bonded biologically and physically with the mother. So a mom's role is really crucial in the social and emotional development. But he believed that infants develop a secure attachment. They need to have what's called good enough parenting. And this really refers to a caregiver who is attuned to the infant's needs, providing physical and emotional care. Good enough parenting is not perfect parenting, but it leans toward the child's healthy development. He believed that infants, need that consistent environment, that attuning, that their basic needs are met, but their emotional needs are met as well. And they have to be met all throughout their life in their developmental stages. And it's like a building block of attachment, safe attachment experiences throughout life. So playing, having fun, being a child who is able to be a child and not worry about, is my mom going to come back? Or there's something going on in my house that doesn't feel well, or I'm seeing something I shouldn't see. Things are left around the house that I shouldn't see. Um, those are not ways in which we attune to our child. We have to make sure that they're in a place that's safe and that we see what they need. We also help them with emotional regulation and providing that good enough parenting. And there's certain pieces of this good enough parenting that I wanted to mention. And there's actually, four I'd like to really talk about. And the first one is healthy autonomy and performance. And good enough parenting really looks like the ability to help our children develop their own personalities, not something that we want them to look like, their own abilities and self-confidence as they grow into their own healthy adult. And nurturing helps this to avoid impaired autonomy and performance. And many times I see what we call a lot of enmeshed people, enmeshed families. Codependency is a form of enmeshment, but it becomes very problematic. Sometimes moms may be attached to a child too much because there's problems in the marriage. We call that triangulation. And so it really interrupts those stable attachment styles. So we need, parents really need to provide a child a separate identity from them in order for, us to grow up and to be a healthy adult. The second one is connection and acceptance versus disconnection and rejection. And I think a lot of folks feel disconnected and rejected, especially when you're in a narcissistic abusive relationship. That rejection is something people know too well. And it's something that we want to make sure that as caregivers of children, that we do not abandon our children and we are connected to them in a way that we show up for them and forming those safe connections versus maybe discounting emotional needs or a sense of self. And, many times I've seen parents, humiliate their child, especially in public, um, shame a child, and many kids, especially adolescents that I've worked with, have built sort of this armor against the shame and difficulties that they experience, and so they don't need anything. They become avoidant. They become problematic within their own life. They have trouble finishing school, using drugs and alcohol. But good enough parent really is attending to their connections and accepting them for being individuals themselves, even if they're 5. The third one is reasonable limits. And this is a really important one for those people who struggle with reasonable limits and knowing where I stop, where somebody else begins, knowing what's right and wrong. Um, I know you've got podcasts out there talking about boundaries. So I won't talk about that because it is really important here. Reasonable limits. What are the boundaries with our own cells, bodies, what we do, what we don't do? But this is connected to attachment. It's vital for parents to have adult boundaries and child boundaries. They are very separate. Providing healthy ways to create emotional regulation helps with self-discipline and feelings of success. And then what happens is that, oh, I can do this, but we have reasonable limits. We don't go too far. And this kind of goes into what I call natural logical consequences in life. So many times when there are difficulties in attachment, or maybe overindulging parent or undergiving parents, we don't have reasonable limits. We really don't pay attention to them. But natural logical consequences are if you slam the door 3 times, the door comes off the wall. It's not where, okay, well, you slammed the door 3 times, but you're grounded for 6 months. It doesn't make sense. And so when we go out in the world as adults, if we go to work, we get paid. If we don't go to work, we don't get paid. It's a natural logical consequence. It makes sense. And so while we're growing and trying to have safe attachments, we also need to teach kids to make sense of things, because if they don't make sense, then we're going to make decisions about what we do and what we don't do based on illogic formations of how we see the world. So helping our children have reasonable limits, reasonable understandings, and realistic standards and reciprocity. And this is the last one, which is good enough parenting provides reasonable standards, not ones that provoke negative problems of internalizing a critical self, which really negatively affects attachments in the family. So, if we want our child to be perfect because maybe we hold our own shame, the child can't establish that and shouldn't be perfect. The child should be able to make mistakes and know that they haven't failed their parent. And so when we shame them or expect too much, they maybe create perfectionism or having really high standards of themselves, and maybe they can't really fill those shoes at times. But when you instill compassion and reciprocity and empathy in your child, when you give them the same thing yourself, it helps with a safer attachment. They watch and learn from you, and if you're safe to attach to others, they'll learn to do this as well out there to find safe attachers. It's not luck. This goes back to what we were talking about earlier. It's not luck about finding safe people to attach to. It's learning what that looks like and understanding and allowing that safety to come and be a part of your life.
Thank you. And can you just like remind like where did this good enough parenting relate to when we were talking about theory of attachments? Can you just remind us of that?
Yeah, so good enough parenting allows um, one as a parent to know that they don't have to be the perfect parent or not a very good parent, but just good enough. This is, I liken this to Goldilocks and the Three Bears. It's not too hot, it's not too cold, it's just right. And when we have the ability to look, instead of in the black and white way, which is abnormal thinking, but this sort of gray way that it's good enough, what happens is that it allows our children to feel safe enough to come to us to say, hey, mom, I'm really struggling with this boy who's pressuring me, or, I'm feeling stress at school, or I didn't like it when dad said this. And then with good enough parenting, what we do is we allow that child to express themselves, to meet that need, to be heard and understood, which creates a safer attachment to a caregiver, knowing that I can go to you and I'm loved no matter what. You won't refuse me. You won't deprive me. You won't abandon me. And abandoning looks like a lot of things. It doesn't have to mean physical abandonment, it's emotional abandonment too. So good enough parenting allows the parent to know and understand and learn how to develop healthy autonomy and performance, healthy belonging, safety, nurturance, stability. Listen, we're not perfect as parents, but we want to try to be a good enough here.
Thank you. And so was this good enough parenting and the kind of four things involved in it? Was it like Donald's work or someone else's? Or yeah.
Yeah, so he talks about good enough parenting, and he certainly has um, fundamental theological views of this. And it has continued to develop over the course of decades to where we are now. And we're still learning what is good enough parenting. But it goes back to those real basic needs that we all have, no matter where we live, how much money we have, what the environment looks like, cultural, whatever it is, we all have the same basic needs. And um, that's where we start out. And good enough parenting is the ability to meet those needs in a very healthy way. And so his research is wonderful. And again, if you can pick up any reading from him, I would suggest that it's wonderful.
Thank you. And so when we kind of talk about the theory of attachment, so were names like John Bowlby, Donald Winnicott, and Mary Ainsworth came up, and I feel like I'm not entirely sure because like I'm not the expert here, but I feel like whenever you look up, someone looks up like the theory of attachments or attachment styles, always those like four come up like disorganized, avoidant, anxious, secure, and mm, more rarely comes up the self-focused. Is that like a newer concept? And is there any like kind of name behind it? Like, is there someone who specifically has researched it? And yeah, is it so? Those two questions: is it a newer concept, and is someone kind of really being the leading professional or like yeah, when
Yeah.
researching
Yeah.
about the self-focused? Yeah.
I'm not sure who was like a theoretical model around this, but it's a newer type of attachment theory. Um, you know, Many times that if we look at personality disorders, Kohut is probably one of the biggest attachment researchers in our recent times in looking at this self-love, self-object situation. And you'll find that when we look at cluster B personality issues, the self-focus, and Kohut's research really talks a lot about that in the affect regulation and adjusting to like what that self-object, like I need my needs met before anybody else, and this sort of absorption um, and the like. So it's a much more newer theory that we're looking at, and connecting this to um, certainly more research with narcissistic personality disorder is a definite.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Also, at some point during our discussion today, you said that like if you have disorganized, or like you didn't say exactly like this, but like something along the lines of like if someone has like insecure attachment, so disorganized, avoidant, or like anxious, it is possible to work towards secure attachment. I'm thinking, is that the same with self-focused? Are people with self-focused attachment able to work towards secure, or is it like, no, that's not possible? Or what are your
Yeah,
thoughts?
yeah. So that's a great question. And when you think of self-focus, you're like, do I need to focus on myself? It's not quite like that, but we do, especially in the work that I do, we look at how do you get, because your needs weren't met, and because of the insecure attachment, anxious attachment, disorganized attachment, your needs weren't met. So how do we go about then getting those needs met as adults? And so when we look at and we'll talk about this later, but schema therapy really looks at the healthy adult and the child self. And it's really reparenting ourselves, knowing what we needed and what we didn't get, and being able to meet those needs ourselves. It's different from self-focused. It's about seeing our healthy adult, being able to connect to our child that's really hurting here, abandoned, or whatever that might be, and helping to secure him or her that's in there, or whoever whoever they are in there, and connecting to them, being there, attaching to them, providing safety for them, trusting them, telling them, hey, you did a great job, I believe in you, and really coming to a place of living um, living in your own sense of self, your own identity, attaching to the positive, healthy parent in you, the healthy adult that many times shows up in work but doesn't show up at home. We kind of fall apart when we get home, but we can do things at work. So really focusing on how do I heal my wounds? How do I heal those wounds that because I'm really hurting and I didn't get hey, sweetheart, I love you. It's going to be okay. And really being able to give that to the self. It's more curative. Many times we want somebody else to do that for us. We're what we call other-centered. And being other-centered, while we all like to hear attaboys like that, but when you give it to yourself, which many people go, oh, but I'm being selfish. No, it's not like that. You are actually meeting your own needs. And you're the only person as an adult to be able to meet those needs just the way that you need to meet them. Because sometimes we'll get disappointed if somebody doesn't meet them exactly how we want them to be met. And so it's in here where we become more attached and know ourselves. It's that identity that we create. And many times when people start to lose the insecure attachment, the anxious attachment, the ambivalent and avoidant and disorganized, they go, well, I don't know who I am now. And right, you don't. And that's why you're here. That's why you're working on it. And this is about discovery because you've never discovered this part of yourself before. And this is a really great healing time for someone when they've gotten to that point of understanding.
Thank you. So does that mean that like individuals with self-focused attachment, they don't like that process doesn't happen where they would what you just described with the other like, or can you just like highlight even more like, okay, so how does the process look like with self-focused folks, or is there even knowledge about that?
Um, so what I'm talking about is a different, it's not, I wouldn't call it self-focused. I would call it sort of meeting your own needs, attaching to yourself and trusting, yourself, your gut, your understanding, and more of what we call integration of the self versus I'm this child state over here. I've got these wounds in here, and then I've got this other part of me that's healthy adult. We want to, basically integrate both of those so that we can be complete and know that the attachment styles that we've had in these moments of pain and our wounds here, um, are met by integrating and knowing and accepting, yes, these things have happened to me, but it doesn't define me. I get to define who I am. I get to identify who I am. I don't need to be enmeshed with my mother. I don't need her approval to tell me I'm okay because I know I'm okay. And this is, I mean, it takes a long time to get to that point. It's not. So one of the things that many of my clients will say to me is like, I'm really worried that I'm going to end up being narcissistic. And I kind, I smile at them and say, if you're saying that to me, I don't think you need to worry because you know what that's like. You know what that is. You're not there. That's not a part of you. Now we all have narcissism. It just depends on the spectrum of narcissism. And so we want to stay in that nice middle gray ground again, where we have healthy narcissism. And many times the folks who are in abusive relationships are something that I call as like an inverted ego versus like an over ego, where you see in overt and covert narcissists here. We're more inverted in nature, where we don't feel really great about ourselves. We have low self-esteem, and we get attached to many times this over here because we feel like it's going to make up for what we don't have.
Thank you. I was like trying to ask like people who have like it is like that they have self-focused attachment. So it's
Right.
not so yeah, so those can they get can they work towards becoming secure? Like so it's like it's not that
Yes.
they are yeah, do you understand? Yeah.
Oh, yes, I absolutely understand that. So, um, that's a very, very difficult question to answer. It depends. It depends on a lot of things. So when you're looking at narcissism, self-focused, attachment style, you're asking and you're wanting them to have safe attachment. they would, to me, in my experience, and I treat these folks, it takes a lot of insight. It takes a lot of understanding from the other person's perspective. And many times there's an inability to have what, the object relations theory, like, oftentimes I ask this question. Pretend that envision yourself sitting in this room and you're a fly on the wall. Can you see what's happening below you? Can you visualize that? Can you tell that I'm sitting across from you from a 30,000-foot view? And you'd be surprised, many times folks that struggle with this cannot see that. And so it's really difficult for empathy to occur because they don't see it from the perspective of the other person. And so for them to develop an attachment with a safe attachment of empathy and understanding and compassion, one would have to be able to have more ability to be towards the healthier narcissism than the other side of the spectrum. It's very, very difficult. I have treated um, self-focused folks for a long time, and for years they'll be in treatment, and they'll need to be in treatment for the rest of their lives in order to um, keep control of some things and help with understanding their patterns and how they sabotage themselves, and how what they want so badly really internally is to attach, but they get in their own way here. And many times they don't see that. And it takes somebody to be able to point it out, but you have to do it with a lot of strategy and empathy, and do empathic confrontation, and be very careful there. Because of being offended, it comes up really easily, which um, is another thing too, because if I am the person who's self-focused and I can't hold on to at being empathetic with you, I'm always going to come back to me. So it's a constant chase to fight to try to understand that.
Thank you so much for today's discussion. Do you now have any like final thoughts about what we today talked about?
Well, I just would, kind of like to wrap up and say, attachment theory is really important, for all of us here, for understanding ourselves, understanding our own children, our own families, our own relationships in the workplace. And if you're in therapy and you're not talking about some attachment styles, encourage your therapist to talk about them with you, help you to understand them. One of the key applications in attachment theory in modern psychology is its role in understanding and improving relationships. And, individuals develop different patterns of attachments based on those early experiences. And so hopefully the therapist that you have maybe uses attachment theory to help work through impacting situations where you've got interesting dynamics in your relationships, and understanding of the self. It's really, really important. Um, and I would also suggest understanding what a secure attachment looks like, allowing yourself to invite that in. Through first a safe environment, which is usually the therapeutic room, with your therapist, and then take that lab experiment and work on that outside.